Boiler mechanic, geopolitics, smoking in my old Peterson pipe. Mississippi River. I ordered some. Maybe I should turn up the mic a little bit here. Da 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 da. Okay, I can sing a little bit. So here we are. The end of the world has began. I'm smoking some Mississippi River. I got it out of the. I think I ordered some pipes from Missouri Meerschaum, some corncob pipes, and decided to get. I wanted plum pudding, but they didn't have any, so I got Mississippi River. It's all right. It's got like red Virginias in it. It has that berry flavor, maybe some dark fired in there. It's pretty good. I have my geopolitics map. I've really been getting into this. It's actually brought some focus and a little bit of clarity into my life, I suppose. And I've been having a lot of fun with it. So we had a lot going on in the world today. But I don't even know if I'm going to get into any of that. Because we had something happen last night that was just a blockbuster event. We had a well organized attack orchestrated by Hamas in Israel, and this is unlike anything we've seen maybe in a decade or two. It's quite crazy. Truthfully, I haven't been. I mean, I it kept me up last night when this news broke, and I was probably up till about 3 o'clock in the morning, listening to Spaces and doing research and just trying to figure out what was, trying to get an understanding of the background. Because one thing that's flown under the radar is apparently Hamas claims the Al-Aqsa Mosque was desecrated by some Israeli activists recently. So the Al-Aqsa Mosque, for those who don't know, is the Dome of the Rock, where the Prophet, the Prophet. I don't want to disrespect anybody because I really do respect Islam, and I respect Judaism. Okay, but I do respect Islam. Al-Aqsa Mosque is where the Prophet, according to the Islamic faith, descended from heaven, and he landed on a rock in Jerusalem, and that is the Dome of the Rock. And apparently, I guess maybe the rock is still there. I don't know. So it was quite crazy last night. You had people writing. You had what the Israelis would call terrorists riding into Israeli settlements on paragliders. Uh, it appears that civilians were targeted by the Hamas fighters. Hostages have been taken. A real shit show. And Israel was completely caught off guard. Apparently, the intelligence agencies didn't see this coming. Apparently, it seems to me that this attack must have been what must have been in the works for some time. Very well coordinated, it seems, and reasonably organized and quite widespread. A lot of manpower was brought to bear by Hamas, and the Israelis were completely caught off guard. Now, I would challenge anybody to go look through their, do some history research and show me how many problems there were between Arabs and Jews, but prior to the 20th century. By all accounts, up until the early 20th century, Jews were pillars of the community in most Islamic societies. I mean, we need only read one of the greatest windows into the Islamic world that is readily accessible to people outside of the Islamic world, and that would be 1001 Arabian Nights. And I would challenge anybody to read that. And it's an amazing book anyway. And just look at how in what high regard Jews are depicted in that collection of stories. In fact, up until the 20th century, at least, in Europe, throughout the Middle Ages, even the early Renaissance, when you have the Reformation, you would have been much more secure living in the Islamic world than living in Europe. The Spanish Inquisition, I think that was the 1600s. Nothing like that, of that scale, ever happened in the Islamic world. I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but look, correct me if I'm wrong, but something must have happened in the 20th century that started this Arab-Israeli conflict. I wonder what that could be. And then what's happened since the formation of Israel after World War II is you see what it appears to be an ethno-state in Israel. It appears to be, it's written in their constitution. They say this is a Jewish state. And, I was on a Twitter space earlier, and there was a guy named Kaiser, a fellow German, and he had an amazing take. So I have to give him credit for this, but it's an amazing take, and it's so true. That area has always historically been very cosmopolitan, very multi-ethnic. And if you try to create a state that is what appears to be an ethno-state in one of the most historically diverse, religiously and ethnically areas of the world, chances are there's going to be problems. Now, we have to ask ourselves, who created that ethno-state? It wasn't the Jewish people that created that ethno-state. It was the British. The nefarious British. In the dying days of their dying empire, as their empire breathed its last gasp, they set in motion a chain of events that created the state of Israel. And what did they do? They sent their diplomats to a hapless Harry S. Truman, who was so out of his league with people like Belkin. And they had their way with him. And thus the United States was pulled into this whole mess. So I'm not an expert on this Israeli-Arab conflict, but what I can tell you right here, right now, is that up to now, the Israelis have had the United States backing them, and they still do. But the difference between then and now, the difference between the Yom Kippur War and now is that during the Yom Kippur War, the United States was undisputably the strongest force in that region, and Israel had the backing of the United States. And the United States still backs Israel marginally, but the difference is the United States is a dying empire. And the point of this video is what I'm trying to get across is I believe in the state of Israel's right to exist. And I believe in the right of the people who have lived there for generations, the Jewish people whom I love, to continue to live there. It would be, beyond horrible, for them to have to leave. And it's not going to happen, regardless. So the state of Israel, I support. The right of the Jewish people to have a nation in their homeland, the Jewish people who are perhaps pound for pound the most influential demographic group of people in the world, if we look at their influence on science, on commerce, on literature, on art, pound for pound, the most influential people in the world. And they, at this point, maybe they didn't have a right to have the state of Israel in 1948 or the Mandate of Palestine in the early 20th century. But now those people are there. They've been there for generations. They have a right to be there. But let's not forget that at the end of the day, might makes right. If Israel thinks that the United States is going to back them to the point of, if the United States is going to be a reliable ally, the Israelis have another thing coming. The Israelis would be making a huge mistake to rely on the United States. And I'm hearing down the grapevine, I believe this take is that perhaps Hamas, seeing a potential peace deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia, wanted to disrupt that. And I would caution Israel not to play into the hands of Hamas. See, the world is changing right now. And the United States is not going to be there to get them out of a jam. Not that the United States necessarily got them completely out of a jam before. The Israelis have maintained their nation through a combination of good diplomacy, guile, and force. And that makes them right at the end of the day. But now and they had the United States to help them. But now we're in a situation where the United States is not going to be there to help them. The United States is a dying empire. Israel needs to change their approach if they want to continue to occupy, I shouldn't say occupy, if they want to continue to live in their traditional homeland, they're going to have to realize that they're going to have to change their approach not only to the Palestinians but to all of their neighbors in the region, because they are surrounded by people who are fed up from their perspective. They're fed up with the situation going on in Israel. And the Israelis cannot do whatever they want to do to the Palestinians. They have to treat them with a sense of mutual respect. And I'm not saying necessarily that they haven't. I mean, I see the Hamas organization coming in, taking civilians hostage, killing civilians here and there. I mean, that's not a good look. And they can cry. They can be upset about the Al-Aqsa Mosque and all of these other grievances all they want. Both sides have to come together and change their approach. The Israelis do, and I would argue the Palestinians do. The Palestinians now see a situation where I'm sure some of their leaders are saying that the United States is breathing its last gasp, and for them, this is their chance to destroy Israel. There's probably some people in the extreme parts of these organizations that feel that. That's not going to work out for them either. So we have a world that's changing in a way so quickly, and people have to be adaptable. And Benjamin Netanyahu is not the guy to handle this. Benjamin Netanyahu is going to make this worse. So it's kind of convoluted, but that's my take on what's going on. Is that coming in and carpet bombing Gaza and killing thousands of civilians is not going to work out for them, because when they call for the United States to back them up, the United States will not back them up. They should have learned from Ukraine that the United States is not a reliable ally. Sure, there's lots of Christian Zionists, but once you ask those in the United States, these evangelical weirdos who believe all these apocalyptic fucking fairy tales about Israel, sure, there's lots of those, but I bet you once you start asking them to send their kids to Israel to die, they're going to actually approach that with trepidation. Okay, they'll start questioning their beliefs that are so strongly held. Okay, so this is a situation. Right now, how it looks is there's no winners in this situation. Hamas has already, it seems to me, they've already gone too far. I don't see anyone in the Middle East potentially helping them, and they're going to sit there and get massacred. In Israel, they sit there and massacre the Palestinians. That means they're done. That means that eventually the dream is over, because the United States is not going to be there to back them up. The United States is done. We have a president who, as H.A. Goodman says, has mashed potato for brains. It's not going to get any better. They have to change their approach. They have to learn to coexist in a way. They have to compromise. And until they're ready to compromise, it's going to be a rough time for them and everybody else. That's my take on it. As far as the rest of the world, it's been a busy week, folks. We had the Cope Fest in Grenada, where all of these European Union leaders met to discuss how they made a big mistake with Ukraine. We had a bed bug situation in Paris. Canadian Purchasing Manager Index for manufacturing is taking a nosedive. Migrant crisis still going on the border. Obrador, who I like, he's good on the world stage. He says correctly that if you want to take care of the migrant crisis, you have to address the root causes. And what are the root causes? The root causes are American imperialism in Latin America and other places, turning countries like Honduras into a narco state. The sanctions on Venezuela, which are not constructive and just cause humanitarian crises. Cuba is another example. Peru, where we meddled with their politics. So many examples I can give. Obrador says it like it is. He says the United States building a wall is not going to help, and he's correct. You have to address the root causes. In Congo, we have an interesting election shaping up. Around Christmas time, you have the incumbent president, whose name I can still not pronounce. He is he seems like a little bit of a populist type who is trying to thread the needle between being adversarial to the West and friendly with the East. And then you have this guy Fayula who comes in. He's an Atlantic Council guy. He's a former Exxon Mobil executive. He's a Brookings Institution guy. He thinks he won the last election. It was rigged. So we see what's going on here. The West has their candidate in. They want to control Congo. Don't underestimate Congo. Congo is going to be a pivotal country in the war for Africa. Keep an eye on that. And then you have Dr. Mukwege, who is a doctor who took care of rape victims, sexual assault victims, I should say, in Congo. And he's a popular figure. He'll probably be a kind of a spoiler guy. Africa is still interesting. We have Uganda. There's challenges to this anti-gay law in Uganda. Basically, on the books is a law that makes homosexuality punishable by death. This goes back to a backlash from the West trying to basically socially engineer Ugandan society. And what happened is there was such a backlash, such a boomerang effect that Uganda then went the opposite direction and made homosexuality punishable by death. You have Zimbabwe trying to outlaw NGOs, which are basically usually cutouts for Western intelligence agencies. They're doing the right thing. What else is going on? This is an interesting story. I'll even put this one up. So the Georgian government is accusing the United States of using NGOs connected to the National Endowment for Democracy to overthrow the Georgian government. So this is the article from RT. This kind of flew under the radar. But basically, the Georgian government is calling out the United States, saying, yeah, you're using these nonprofits to basically fuck with our political system. And this is something that, people should understand is going on throughout the world. The United States says, oh, no, we're just trying to, promote democracy. To the United States, democracy means, promote our interests. Just, whenever they say threaten democracy or promote democracy, that means threaten our interests or promote our interests. So this was an interesting situation. They got called out, kind of flew under the radar. Prigozhin. There was a whole situation where Vladimir Putin said that grenade fragments were found in the wreckage of the plane crash of Prigozhin. So that suggests that a grenade went off on the in the plane during flight. That's the implication. I still don't think that Putin had him killed. I just don't believe that. Putin is a lawyer. He is a guy that is all about the legal system. If he wanted to get rid of Prigozhin, he would have found a way to do it through the legal system. That's my opinion. China is basically mass producing nuclear reactors on a scale that we couldn't dream of in the West. In the Philippines, like last week, we're having incidents in the South China Sea. So there goes a Chinese Coast Guard ship, and there goes a Philippine Coast Guard ship, Philippine like vessel. This was totally set up. So basically, they invited journalists on the boat, and they went out into sea. And who knows who antagonized who in this situation. But they admit in this article that journalists were invited on this boat, and the whole point was to, show the journalists and the world what's going on. But they could have this could have easily been the Filipino vessel basically trying to collide with the Chinese vessel. No one really knows, but it was kind of set up, in my opinion. The president in the Philippines is not doing well in the polls. So this might suggest that perhaps the population isn't really comfortable with the stance on China. Yeah, so I'm guessing, just based on what I'm seeing, that perhaps the Filipinos aren't really super comfortable with how this current president is being very antagonistic towards China. There's lots of weapons deals going on. I'm sure there's corruption going on. It doesn't seem to be flying with the Philippine people. Seems like they're smarter than Americans, which is not too hard, but they're probably very smart people. Fukushima reactor releasing a ton of radioactive water. Into the ocean. China's not happy about it. Japan says, what, me worry? It's no problem. Another interesting story from Japan. Up here in northern Japan, some bears snuck into a factory. I guess maybe it's starting to get cold there. And they had it was a whole shit show. They were trying to get the bears out. Eventually they captured them in cages. It took like 2 days. But what I found interesting is that they killed the bears. They murdered the bears. Their excuse was, well, if we don't murder them, they may come back to the factory. So I found that interesting. Like, they were pretty ruthless. They caught the bears in the cages, but that wasn't enough. They had to kill them. So I guess there's been a lot of bear attacks in that part of Japan. and it's not on the map, but there was also, a very highly publicized bear attack in, I think it was Canada at the beginning of the week. What else is going on? Let's just do a little round robin, and I'll make this relatively short. Let's go back. Let's see. Oh, New Zealand. The Prime Minister said nobody was forced. So the he's the interim Prime Minister, I guess, because that bitch, she's gone. That crazy bitch with her horse face, and the one that was just in the World Economic Forum or something talking about how we need to censor speech and this. She's a real piece of shit. I can't stand her. Well, this guy gets up there. I bet there's even a video. Yeah, maybe we can look at the video. This is hilarious. I mean, if you know anything about what happened in New Zealand, and then this guy, this is the bitch I'm talking about. Look at this bitch. Look at this bitch. Can you look at this? Look at her teeth. I mean, what a psycho. Let me see if I can get this guy. Can we get this working? Please. Reload this. Doesn't seem like it wants to work. Anyway, look at this guy. He looks like a deer, deer headlights sort of thing. Here we go. It's not going to work. Anyway, so he's basically up there. The journalists are basically saying, yeah, are you ever going to compensate people who lost their jobs and were persecuted for not getting a vaccine? And he has the gall to say nobody was forced to get a vaccine in New Zealand. What a loser. What else is going on here? Yeah, Mexican Obrador also. Obrador, he's always on fire. I love this guy. I mean, I'm not I don't care about his policies. Those are Mexican policies. I mean, I'm not against socialism per se. So, it's he's pretty far left, Okay, that's good. I hope it works out for them. But he just says whatever. He just says what needs to be said. This guy's great. And he kind of has like that old man gangster look, like an old gangster. He's really, like the Godfather. He says, stop. He blasts the U.S. Stop spending so much money on Ukraine. Why don't you help in Latin America? Because you fucked up Latin America. Okay, so why don't you help? So that was what he said. The cartels, with the taco icon, the cartels are learning from the Russians. They probably started doing this before the war in Ukraine, honestly. But they're using drones to drop bombs on people. So that's fantastic. Mucho respeto to the soldados. Okay, anybody who fights against the government, they're okay in my book. You have a friend here. Guatemala is still having issues. Basically, they're trying to keep the guy who won the election out of office. I'm not sure. I'm not, it seems to me like the United States basically supports this guy as far as the Biden administration. They seem to support this guy. But basically, the court system is trying to keep him out of office. They're being real assholes. Now, this was an interesting article, and what I found really interesting about this is an AP article, unfortunately. But basically, the immigrants are traversing the Darien Gap, which, for people who don't know, is one of the most inhospitable, impenetrable places on Earth. Basically, with the Darien Gap, you have a fault line here. Okay, so if you zoom in, there are literally, I don't know if there's one road that traverses the Darien Gap. Maybe there's a couple trails. Looks like this is a road. No, you see, there are literally, yeah, no roads. There are no roads going through the Darien Gap. You see how these roads just end here? Okay, so the terrain, as you can see, is really kind of crazy. And why that is there's actually a fault line here. So no roads could ever be built through here. There was a proposal to build a railroad through the Darien Gap going all the way back to the 1800s. And it couldn't be built. They figured it couldn't be built because there's too much seismic activity, essentially. Basically, the fault lines make it so that any road that's going to be built or railroad that's going to be built across the Darien Gap is going to be destroyed. And if you zoom in, there are no roads. This is completely uninhabited. There's like indigenous communities here, but other than that, it is one of the most remote places on Earth. Now, what I found interesting about this article is these migrants that are passing through the Darien Gap, you know, which is a feat in and of itself that they're actually doing this. A lot of them are from Venezuela because for some reason we have sanctions on Venezuela. Don't ask me why. There's no actual good reason to have sanctions on Venezuela. Let's just be real. But anyway, they're going through the Darien Gap. And what struck me is just what a cottage industry has developed here in the Darien Gap. Like for the boat ride across some of these rivers, there's like people that operate little canoes and boats, and they're charging the people like $25 or $30, which, you know, to someone from Venezuela, that's a lot of money. And there's guides, there's places for them to stay overnight, there's people selling, you know, provisions, and it's just like this whole cottage industry of people in Colombia, in Panama. It seems to me, I don't quote me on this, but it seems to me like even the indigenous people are, you know, getting something out of this. So like it's this whole cottage industry of basically exploiting people who are, you know, migrating, which you know, tells you just how big a problem we have and how hard it's going to be to solve. Because all these people that are making a lot of money, they're not going to take too kindly, you know, to measures to stop the migration, you know. So, and they're going to be able to bribe local officials and all this. And Mexico is right. You know, Obrador is right. The root causes of this problem are what need to be addressed. The United States overthrowing governments and putting in drug smugglers like what we did in Honduras, or needlessly sanctioning countries like Venezuela and Cuba is why we have this migration crisis. But nobody in the United States wants to even talk about that, which I find interesting. Bolivia, what was happening here? Colombia, they have, I just found it interesting that they have 11% inflation, which means I guess their statisticians are more honest than ours, and they're talking about doing a rate cut next year. I just found that interesting. We have to keep an eye on these things in Latin America. They do affect us. Ecuador, in the wake of a presidential candidate being assassinated, now we have this nice-looking man. He is, you know, a business advocate versus a more socialist. I think he's ahead right now. And what's interesting about this is the previous candidate on the socialist side was assassinated, and who knows? Anytime I hear about, you know, a presidential candidate getting assassinated in Latin America, I kind of think United States, but that's just me. And finally, I think we're going to end it with Argentina. On top of all the other problems they have a soybean crisis. Essentially, the soybean crop was really bad, and all of the processing plants are in trouble. And just basically Argentina can't catch a break is what it is. And I will cry for Argentina because I might move there someday if they get their shit together. I'm just thinking. Because the United States, there's no future here in the United States, folks. I hate to break it to you, to the boomers and to everybody else. There's no future here. Ivory Coast, prime minister or president dissolves parliament, so there's political problems in the Ivory Coast. Another francophone former French colony. What happened in Britain? Russell Brand is being pursued by the criminal justice system in Britain. Color me surprised. Remember, so for those that can't remember what happened a week ago, we had the huge rally of the opposition in Poland. Not that it matters. Both political parties in Poland seem to be stupid to me. And I think that's about it. Oh, yeah, Pakistan is deporting their 1.7 million Afghans they're threatening to deport from Pakistan. They're all undocumented migrants, essentially. Maldives president, pro-China president, won at the beginning of the year. Nice article here from the Asia Times, which, it kind of sucks because, let's see if it works. It kind of sucks because you have to read. Even on web on Wayback Machine, I couldn't get rid of this fucking stupid thing here. If you hit OK, it won't work because it's an archive version. But you can read the article. It explains pretty well what I've been feeling for a long time, which is China's property bubble is not like the U.S. property bubble in 2008. It's not going to make or break the Chinese. I mean, if you look at China, China has a deep economy. One reason why the great financial crisis was so bad is because the United States economy is very shallow, whereas the Chinese economy is always going to have this manufacturing base, and as long as they don't fuck that up, they'll be fine. And I think that's about it. Yeah, I'm going to call it here. I'm going to call it quits here. I am out.